Solid steal up there. A steal. Yep. Richards got a dance right there. Backhand. Wait. You better move. What the hell? All right, get. No!
Pro wrestling, a modern sport born from two older styles, Greco-Roman, a style that existed since the ancient Greek Olympics, which prohibited the use of the lower body, and freestyle wrestling, which allowed it. In its earliest years, pro wrestling would be a purely competitive sport until it became a choreographed spectacle in the 1920s. At the height of World War II, which lasted from 1939 to 1945, the popularity of pro wrestling understandably declined, and wouldn't see another resurgence until peacetime in the late 1940s. Enter the golden age of pro wrestling. The US, Japan, and Mexico would be the three major countries to revive the modern sport, with legends such as Gorgeous George, Rikito-san, and El Santo being the faces of their respective nation. This age of wrestling would last well into the 1970s, only to see a second resurgence in the US during the 1980s, and by extension, a second golden age through the advent of cable television. It was during this era that one Vincent Kennedy McMahon would found the company which would forever shape the pro wrestling industry for decades to come, the World Wrestling Federation. Or if you'd rather get the F out, the WWE. Among the faces of this era of wrestling would be Macho Man Randy Savage, Rowdy Roddy Piper, Ric Flair, Andre the Giant, and of course, the spotlight-hogging Hulk Hogan. And it's here where Team Ninja would draw inspiration for their second pro wrestler in the PlayStation remake of the first era live alongside Tina Armstrong. And his name was Kevin Nash.
Helena, it's showtime!
Just kidding, it was Bass Armstrong. Making a vow to his late wife Alicia to make sure their daughter Tina Armstrong, a woman of many dreams, grows up to be a decent woman of importance. This is the 10th episode of Dead or Alive Will Explain, featuring Bass Armstrong, the father of the dream.
リングに上がりゃ容赦はしねえぞ。貴様などにティナは渡さん。いつ何時俺は誰の挑戦でも受けるプロレス最強。
Get ready, fight!
It's a showtime!
A strong believer in pulling himself by the bootstraps, and established as an undefeated legend of pro wrestling in the fictional western world of Dead or Alive, Bass is the self-proclaimed strongest fighter in the tournament, is arrogant to a fault, and will use any opportunity to show off his feats. However, he is also shown to give credit where credit is due when someone does meet his standards of what he considers true strength, and like any decent father, is very protective of his daughter. Sometimes a little too protective. Hell, he takes such good care of his bike that he also named it after Tina. Okay, most of the time he takes good care of it. Bass's design draws heavy inspiration from Golden Age WWE superstar Hulk Hogan, right down to his towering build, slick blonde hairstyle and a mullet with a beard to match, the mannerisms in his victory poses, and even some of his costumes. Although American, Bass Armstrong's namesake can be interpreted in several ways. His first name derives from the French word bes, which is a person who is big and strong. The surname Armstrong originates from Scotland, which, surprise surprise, means strong in the arm. Another way his name can be interpreted is a combination of two American astronauts behind Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. While the latter is more obvious, Buzz Aldrin's first name can be interpreted as a play on words phonetically in Japanese, which sounds like bass. Speaking of which, bass is sometimes pronounced bass by Western fans, but seeing as his namesake is hardly related to sound, this pronunciation is considered incorrect. That being said, it's safe to say he doesn't secretly have a dog named Treble.
Come on, Treble!
Much like her daughter Tina, Bass's pro wrestling fighting style is a living encyclopedia of famous wrestling moves from a variety of wrestlers, including the leg drop from Hulk Hogan, the Thunderfire Bass Bomb, which is his take on the Crucifix Powerbomb from Razor Ramon, the Bass Bottom, which is his take on the Rock Bottom from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the Oklahoma Stampede by Dr. Death Steve Williams, and on a more fantastical note, the Kiniku Buster from the fictional Kinnikuman manga and anime series, also known as Ultimate Muscle in the West. And this is barely scratching the surface. For that very reason, we'll be saving this deep dive of pro wrestling references for Bass's trivia episode. Brimming with overwhelming confidence, a heart of gold, and sometimes overzealous care for his family. When it comes to the competing roster of Dead or Alive, Bass's presence is too damn strong in the R. It's unclear when Bass Armstrong accurately began his pro wrestling career or when he married the love of his life, Alicia, but we can at least speculate it was in his very early 20s, and since that time, he remained undefeated throughout his career. It's an undisputed fact, however, that at the age of 24, he and Alicia brought their lovely daughter Tina into the world, a daughter who would share as many stubborn traits as her father and would pursue many dreams as she grew up. Unfortunately, only one of the parents would live to see their child pursue these dreams. 6 years after Tina was born, Alicia died of an undisclosed illness. Grief-stricken for Alicia's loss, Bass imposed upon himself to raise Tina in her footsteps in the hopes of being twice the wrestling legend he was, and to keep her close to him, possibly out of fear of losing her the way he did Alicia. Day after day, Tina ate, slept, and lived wrestling under Bass's harsh training. And by the time Tina was in high school, Tina was, by his standards, a wrestling expert. But the day was soon approaching when Tina would become a full-grown adult, and with that age comes freedom and independence, which means that no matter how much he wanted Tina to be safe, there are just some things he can't control, such as her loss of interest in pro wrestling and pursuing other career options. Despite this, Bass still believed that Tina was Daddy's little girl and would do whatever it takes to keep her focused on the competitive world of wrestling. His master plan, you ask? To register the both of them in the first Dead or Alive tournament. Realizing that Tina's love of the sport of wrestling was losing its spark, Bass desperately convinces Tina to reignite that spark through testing their skills by entering the first Dead or Alive tournament, a no-holds-barred contest consisting of only the very best fighters around the world. While Bass was certainly in it for the sport, Tina, unbeknownst to Bass, saw this as an opportunity for Tina to pursue the very career option she was looking for, a shot at Hollywood fame. To him, all the competitors were nothing more than rookies and treated them as such, going easy on some of the entrants, such as Kasumi. Unfortunately, this would prove to be his downfall, as he was eliminated early on and never made it to the quarterfinals. By contrast, Tina made it to the semifinals and won the prize money by default after Kasumi and Ayane disappeared from the tournament, using that opportunity to jumpstart her claim to fame through the Hollywood eye, much to Bass's ire. Furious over the stunt Tina pulled under his nose in the first tournament, Bass would attempt to thwart Tina's Hollywood pursuit by challenging her directly in the second Dead or Alive tournament in the hopes of not only preventing her from getting the prize money, but proving she has a lot to learn about pro wrestling and that she isn't on his level just yet, which of course is a lie. What Bass truly feared was the many temptations in the world that would corrupt his one and only daughter, and getting mixed up with the wrong people that would send her in a downward spiral. He believed that using her sex appeal to gain celebrity status was a surefire way to ruin her reputation. During his training exercise hauling a semi-truck in where we can only speculate is the Rio Grande in Texas, Zach, for reasons we don't know so don't ask, interacts with a prairie dog, affectionately naming her Tina. How can we tell if it's female? Simple. They're a lot thinner than male prairie dogs. Who says Dead or Alive can't be educational? And just when Zach was about to make a new friend, this happened. Okay, time out. Bass, you're a single father with an only daughter, you want what's best for her, and you're not gonna just let anyone take advantage of her. I get it, I totally get it. But just take a minute to observe your surroundings. You're in the middle of nowhere, hauling a semi-truck, yelling at a guy who also decided to take a trip in the middle of nowhere. Do you really think Zach's thinking about hooking up with your daughter in the middle of fucking nowhere? Think, Bass, think! I know it's a hard pill to swallow, but your daughter ain't the only popular Tina around. Shit, dude. For all we know, Zach was fresh out of playing the fan-translated ROM hack of Final Fantasy VI, got really, really high on drugs, and probably thinks he's looking for a certain half-human, half-Esper in the second half of the game. Aw, shit, we gotta play that clip again, don't we?
Don't do drugs. If you're doing it, stop it. Get some help.
Walking in on Zach and hearing his innocent conversation with a furry little critter, Bass erupts into a volcanic rage, believing that Zach has deviant plans for his little girl, and the two begin fighting to an unknown outcome. Later in the tournament, Bass will be one of many opponents Ryu Hayabusa would send to the losers bracket, only for Bass to come face to face with Tina. In the end, Bass would taste the agony of defeat by his own daughter, with his last throws berating her stubbornness. In rebuttal, Tina would say she learned it from him. Back home, Bass would begrudgingly watch as Tina models on public television, cementing her career as a Hollywood superstar, ultimately destroying his TV set in a fit of rage, and in the events of Dead or Alive 2 from Bass's perspective. As Tina's star was on the rise, Bass grew more and more anxious about his daughter's well-being, overhearing her conversation with a new DOA competitor, Hitomi, on her plans to become an actress. Needless to say, he wasn't having it. It would enter the DOA tournament to prevent Tina from getting a shot at the prize money again. Later that evening at an island resort beach, Bass would sit down with Genfu and go on a rant about his woes, and during his rant, Genfu would notice Tina passing by. During the third Dead or Alive tournament, Bass would once again face off against Tina, scolding her about her career jumps and projecting his ambitions on her. Tina, in defiance, puts her foot down, doubling down on her dream to become an actress no matter what, and the two begin fighting. Surely lightning wouldn't strike twice for Tina this time, right? Spoiler alert, it did.
No shit.
Having once again been defeated by Tina, Bass blows off some steam by taking a joyride through the Rio Grande on his motorcycle, which, as mentioned earlier in this video, he named Tina. Unfortunately, the bike broke down in the middle of nowhere. Frustrated, Bass did the most logical thing he could do: suplex the bike. Hours later, Bass would repair the bike, when suddenly, a pink convertible would pass by, and at the driver's seat was Tina Armstrong herself. Honestly, I don't blame Tina for passing by, especially if Bass was willing to suplex his own bike that he named after his daughter, whom he cares so deeply for, and given the context, that's kind of messed up. That being said, this ends the events of Dead or Alive 3 from Bass's perspective. One day, while doing some shopping for products in Muramasa's booth at the Seaside Market, Golden Scarab brand flour to be exact, a broadcast of Tina on national television during a wrestling match catches his eye. She makes a speech thanking all the people who contributed to her success, all except Bass, which causes him to be understandably slighted. As if that wasn't enough, Tina shifted dream gears from a Hollywood actress to a full-on rock star in the music industry. Enraged, Bass yanks the TV from the electrical outlet and tosses it in the air. Incidentally, a drunken Brad Wong stands in his way, and the two begin fighting to an unknown outcome. On its way to the Tri-Tower, Bass kills time at a casino nearby, hoping to gamble away his woes. After some unlucky hands, Bass storms out of the casino, causing wanton destruction along the way. However, Lei Fang wasn't having any of it, and quelled his anger before he turned the bustling gambler's paradise into the literal streets of rage. I always wanted to say that. After yet another cooldown, Bass finally shows up at the BWA Stadium to confront Tina once more, pleading for her to not pursue a career in the music business. In a clever rebuttal, Tina points out his own hypocrisy for having a dream of his own, competing in a dangerous racing event called the Hyper Battle Grand Prix. Without even trying, Bass shoots himself in the proverbial foot by expressing his passion for it, and the two begin fighting. And of course Tina won that shit. Of course she did. Did we really expect otherwise at this point? Anyway, after their meeting, Bass pursues his dream and competes in that very racing event, which takes place in a yet unknown bustling city on a raised road track with side barriers. I'll assume it's Tokyo. Brimming with absolute confidence in himself and his trusty bike Tina, Bass makes short work of the other racers, knocking out everyone that stood in his way of the track. However, his victory lap would be cut short, as a huge monitor would display Tina in a rather intimate scene on the beach with an actor, both of which are completely nude. Bass goes into a panic, believing he was in one of those movies. Losing focus, he throws himself out of the track and lunges himself into the monitor he was watching, timed with a still frame of Tina raising her fist at the screen to comedic effect, ending the events of Dare Live 4 from Bass's perspective. It's unknown when Bass started taking a break from the wrestling industry, or for how long, but what we do know is that 2 years later, Bass was working at an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, taking his trusty motorcycle with him. While fine-tuning it some more in his spare time, his coworker Rig questioned why he even brought it over despite not being able to joyride it in the workplace, which is practically a whole damn area. Bass takes it personally, believing he was insulting his bike, and by extension, his daughter for some crazy reason, and the two begin fighting.
I mean, it ain't gonna do you any good here, is it?
Hey, what do you mean it won't do me any good out here?
I apologize for insulting my baby!
You know what? Fuck the pep talk. Bass had plenty of chances to work out his anger management issues. If this is as good as it gets for him after 2 years, he's got nobody to blame but himself if he gets his ass kicked. Rig kicked his ass after all? What a shock. Anyway, after that little tussle, Rig offers Bass a drink at a pub nearby, and the two would become fast friends. Fast forward a few days later, an accident at the oil rig caused a massive fire in the workplace, waking up Bass from a daydream, and he and Rig would play their part in evacuating employees and civilians alike while they doused the flames, which proved successful.
What's going on? Go on! Come on, move! Get out of here!
Good job, old man.
Later, during his break at work, Bass would catch Tina on national television, making her announcement that she would officially be joining the first Dare Live tournament to happen in 2 years. Hell, she even acknowledges her daddy's existence this time, which reignites a competitive spark in Bass.
Listen up, Rick. You and me are gonna do some sparring.
This is quite ironic, as in the first Dare Live game, it was Bass who was encouraging Tina to compete. Funny how things change. As Zach was setting up the necessary props for the tournament event, Bass makes a dramatic entrance under the poorly disguised and badly named alias, Mr. Strong, demanding Zach to let him join the tournament. In an attempt to gatekeep him, Zach declares that the only way to get in is through him, and the two fight it out, with Mr. Strong coming out victorious, vowing that he'll reunite with Tina. At the quarterfinals of the Dare Live tournament, Mr. Strong makes his grand entrance and challenges Tina, much to her embarrassment. She sees right through the bad disguise after all. And as we know by now, the end result is the same old song. Tina wins the... What the fuck just happened? Do my eyes deceive me? No, it's gotta be a mistake. Tina always wins. Surely there has to be some kind of shenanigans or some stipulation that causes Bass to get disqualified, right? No? He legitimately won? Holy shit. After emerging victorious in a fight against her daughter after 2 years, Mr. Strong is offered a spot as Tina's tag team partner. Okay, so far so good. Things are looking up in this reunion between father and daughter. They're on the same page with the competitive spirit of wrestling. They're both competing in the first Dare Live tournament in 2 years. The stars are aligning. Maybe Tina realizes his daddy was right all along, right?
Wrong!
Just when you thought things would end on a high note, Tina makes another surprise announcement.
That's not all. That
In a shocking twist, Tina announced that she'd go into politics and run for governor, knowing this would bring Mr. Strong out of character, which it did. Despite this, what mattered was that they both reignited their competitive fighting spirit, something the two of them always had in common. And for the moment, Bass and Tina Armstrong shared their first wholesome family bond in years. Later, in the semifinals of the Dead or Alive tournament, Bass, as Mr. Strong, would face off against Jan Lee, and would unfortunately be among the competitors to be eliminated. Back at the workplace, Bass would have a small chat with Helena while playing a game of pool, only for the assassin Christie to appear out of nowhere and have a small chat of her own, and in the events of Dead or Alive 5 from Bass's perspective. After their workplace was destroyed, Bass and his former co-worker Rig would reside in New York, where Bass offered Rig to stay in his garage. Sometime later, Bass would have a chat with Rig about staying at a hotel, believing he was bored staying at the garage, but in reality, it was the contrary, as he preferred the street fighting atmosphere. Rig then offers to spar with Bass, and the two begin fighting. Afterward, the two would go out for a drink. Not too long after Rig and Bass went separate ways, the ninja Hayate used that opportunity to interrogate Rig about Mist while he was alone.
Tell me what you know about Mist.
But Rig has no recollection of what he's talking about, leading to a fight. Bass shortly comes to Rig's aid, causing the ninja to flee. Sometime later at the DOATEC Stadium, with DOATEC CEO Helena Douglas in attendance, Bass and Tina would make a formal announcement about their newly rebranded tag team, called The Muscle. Intrigued, Helena makes an offer to sponsor them under the condition that she tests Tina's skills. After their brief match, Helena makes the deal official, and even throws in a surprise manager for good measure, which was none other than Rig. He had experience as a manager in his old workplace, so it only made sense. A few days later, Bass and Tina would have an exhibition match at the DOATEC Stadium, and would let someone in the audience join in on the action. The lucky candidate was Hanukkah, and despite having a special power of mimicry, she lost the fight against Tina. Afterward, Bass would go more people in the audience to press their luck, as Ayane and Hayate looked below from a scaffold above. During the events of the 6th Dead or Alive tournament, Bass would be introduced by Tina to quite possibly his biggest fan since childhood, the MMA champion Mila. Going head to head in a real tournament, in her mind, was a dream match come true, and she would try her best not to disappoint. Although an intense match, Mila won by the skin of her teeth and was more than willing to fight her idol once again. With a bellowing laugh, Bass vowed that the next time they meet, he won't lose. Shortly after the tournament's end, Bass had gotten worried about Rig's sudden disappearance from the venue, suspicious that the ninja who jumped him a while back may have something to do with it. His suspicions are raised when the assassin Bayman walks up behind him, telling him that he and Hayate are going to put an end to his partner. Talk about subtle. Bass fights off Bayman, causing the assassin to flee and raising even more questions for Bass about his mysterious friend, and in the events of Dead or Alive 6 from Bass's perspective. Say what you will about Bass being a stereotypical American dad from the boomer age, some cases more exaggerated than others, but throughout the sequels, especially in Dead or Alive 5 and 6, we've been seeing a significant amount of character development. For an entire year, we've seen a man stuck in his ways and resistant to change, even to the point where he attempts to project his mindset on his daughter, albeit with good intentions. But as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, or in this case, a breakdown or a self-inflicted crash in the middle of a race. Fortunately for Bass, his personal hell existed in his own mind, and after 2 years of giving Tina space, she was the one who reignited the spark in Bass to wrestle once again, as he did for Tina in the first Dead or Alive tournament. Sure, he was reprehensive when Tina announced she was going to run for governor, but he didn't throw as much of a fit as before, and in the end, he carried her in his arms, and the two were happy to see each other, finding common ground through competition. In other words, DOA brought them together again. Now you can argue that it was all for show to the audience, and Tina only did it because she knew her chances of being a governor were zip. But that would conflict with what would happen next in Dead or Alive 6. They would keep that same energy as a tag team and even rebrand themselves, and there doesn't seem to be any reluctance or friction between either of them at any point. And so for now, it's safe to say that the father-daughter duo are on good terms. With that out of the way, there is a huge, and I mean huge, opportunity for the Armstrongs to get reeled into the main plot. Bass and Rig have been fast friends since the 5th Dead or Alive tournament, and his disappearance after the 6th Dead or Alive tournament, as well as the fact he knows Hayate and Bayman are out to kill him, is the perfect setup for Bass to step out of his comfort zone as a pro wrestler out of retirement and into a true test of strength, one that can involve deceit, betrayal, and inconvenient truths about the company sponsoring him. And when it blows up in the Armstrongs' faces, there's no telling what kind of hell will break loose, knowing that the tournament that brought them together is sponsored by the very same company that had a history of corruption from the very friends they made.
Fate, it seems, is not without a sense of irony.
If Team Ninja ever decides to give Dead or Alive 7 the go-ahead in the near future, I beg the story writers, please do not fuck this up. You have a golden opportunity to get 2 of your longtime characters out of sideshow limbo and into the roles they have long deserved, a chance to play relevant roles in the main story that perfectly align with their desires. Bass's desire for Tina to become a respectable woman, and Tina's desire to make a difference for the children of the future. The stars and stripes have never been more aligned. Shoot your shot, Team Ninja, and make it count. Whatever the future holds for Old Man Bass, you can rest assured that when it comes to protecting his family, his friends, his reputation, and yes, even his bike, Bass will fight anybody, anytime, any place.
I am a champion!
Sème le vent, récolte la tempête, chaque chose. Les faux follets sont ceux qui durent le plus. À chaque jour suffit sa peine, chacun trouve chaussure à son pied. Le temps blanchit.